This shader was downloaded by only one person, and this one by more than 100 million. Today, I will test each of them to find the best shader in terms of beauty and performance. Let's start from the very bottom, the shader with one download. It might seem to you that the image is too saturated, but this is how colors look for people with normal color vision. But more than 300 million people have problems with color perception. For example, someone can barely see green shades, as well as red or blue ones. Some color combinations become almost unrecognizable, and the brain starts to get confused. There are also modes of reduced vision. Everything seems to look normal, but the shades shift slightly, and a person starts confusing colors where they previously distinguished them easily. And this is the most extreme mode, when a person cannot see colors at all. During the day, the world looks almost empty, and at night, complete darkness begins. And this is how ore looks. Most likely, you won't even be able to understand where which block is located. From this moment, the next 10 shaders I will evaluate by graphics. But this shader has a different goal, so for value, I will give it 5 out of 5 stars. And this is a shader with 500 downloads. It may seem to you that it does nothing, but in fact, it adds shadows. But does it heavily load the game? For example, in the forest without shaders, I have 400 FPS, but as soon as I turn it on, we see 300. That means the price of shadows is about 100 FPS in my case. They look good, but if you look closely, you can notice pixels, but thanks to this, the FPS remains stable. Our world did not change much, but if you remove the shadows, you immediately notice that they are actually missing. At the same time, the performance with them is quite good. This shader was downloaded 40 times more. The author writes that he studied 100 old tapes to convey the nostalgia of childhood. The first mode is called Summer Memories. The first thing that catches the eye is the grain and a very saturated world. Right now, I have low settings. If you set Ultra, everything becomes smoother, but the picture becomes very faded. At night, complete darkness appears, but the sky and the moon slightly smooth out this gloom. If you get close to a light source, it starts flickering, just like on old film, but if you move away from it, you will barely see anything. Water on high settings looks not bad, but on low, it is just a nightmare. Without shaders, the water averages about 220 FPS, and with the shader enabled, about 140. By the way, the water glows at night. Probably that's how it is supposed to be, but this is not playable. If you teleport to the end, we are greeted by a huge Jupiter, and right above the head, many meteorites are flying. The author probably wanted to convey the feeling of space, and he did it quite well, but the void below is still scary. I would not play with this shader. At most, I would take a couple of cool screenshots. At the same time, it still loads Minecraft. This shader was downloaded by 50,000 players, only to remember Minecraft from 2010. The first thing that catches the eye is the acid green ground. By the way, who remembers that at that time, there was not even grass yet? But now, everything looks quite calm. If you reduce the render distance to 7, we will see that same thick fog from which Herobrine used to appear. The author even added small shadows, which were also in the beta version, but they were much more modest back then. And this is how rain looks, and it seems that here, it feels much nicer than 16 years ago. And of course, complete darkness at night. Although now, even without shaders, it still looks a little brighter and nicer. FPS. With this shader, almost did not change for me, but still, this is more nostalgia for one evening. I would not play with it constantly. The next shader is from an author from Russia. He published quite a lot of add-ons, including this shader, which was downloaded by 500,000 people. At first glance, nothing special. Everything became a little brighter and nicer. The shadows are soft and neat, exactly the kind that perfectly fits vanilla, and there is also slight motion blur. The water almost does not differ at all. It only slightly sways and has a small reflection. This shader simply makes vanilla Minecraft a better version of itself, but the FPS drops a little, but it is worth it. And this shader was downloaded by 2 million people. Let's figure out what its secret is. For this, I installed it in my Zombie Apocalypse mod pack. During the day, the light looks very flat. Although the sun shines bright, in the distance we still cannot see anything except fog. But at night, complete darkness comes. And this is the first shader on our list where the torch starts glowing directly in the hand. Finally, we have water with a nice texture. It looks a little murky, but it has a small reflection. But this gloom is saved by the nether. It looks much cozier thanks to the saturated lava. Everything is very bright, but it does not seem to strain the eyes. But the end world becomes muted again, although bright stars and a solar eclipse are visible in the dark sky. In the shader with 20,000 downloads, there was Jupiter. It would be interesting to know which one you like more. In the end, outside the world looks depressing, but inside with light, it becomes much cozier. And my FPS dropped by about 50. For a shader, this is very little, so I recommend it, especially if you have a mod pack for such an atmosphere. And these are two shaders which were downloaded by about 8 million people each. Bliss was made by the same author as the previous one, and Solas was developed by another author from Russia. Let's compare which one feels nicer. In Bliss, the sun hides behind volumetric clouds, and the whole image looks cold and a bit blue. In the second one, the light is brighter and noticeably warmer. In the first, everything is lit evenly and quite clean. In the second, each block glows with its own color, and this light spreads around. The water in the first one is darker, but with a small animation. In the second, it is lighter, and it looks like there are bubbles in it. Yes, of course it looks simpler, but nicer. In the nether, the first shader creates a pleasant atmosphere thanks to the fog, and the second simply makes everything bright and saturated. But in the end, they completely diverge. In Bliss, it feels like you are inside a giant vortex of fog, and this is very immersive. In the second one, space simply appears with stars and a black hole, and it also has northern lights in the winter biome, while the first one does not have that. FPS with the second shader drops by about 20% for me, but for such quality, that is quite fair. In the end, Bliss is more suitable for those who love atmosphere, and Solas for those who care about pure beauty. This shader has 15 million downloads. Why did people love it so much? The first thing that catches the eye is the light clouds and how real storm clouds float nearby. Inside buildings, everything is calm, and there is even muted soft light. But when rain begins, the sky becomes completely covered with clouds, and real beauty begins. Visibility drops, and the world becomes gray, and after the rain, a rainbow appears. For comparison, in the shader with BSL with 5, the sky became gray, and everything was a little foggy. In the nether, nothing surprising, just bright lava and saturated light. But the end, again, looks like a solar eclipse. Rays spread from the center, and it looks very cool. Meanwhile, this is how the previous shaders looked. Personally for me, Bliss is much more atmospheric here. My FPS dropped almost in half, but it is worth it. And now the shader with 35 million downloads. The author says it will run on any computer. Let's check it. During the day, the image looks relatively bright compared to the previous top shaders. The water looks fine. It even has a slight wave animation. The light inside buildings is soft and overall pleasant. At night, it is also quite bright, and this is a big plus. The nether here also looks muted. For some, this may be a plus, and the end world is simply minimalistic. Above the head, we have dark clouds, and basically, that's it. But this is still better than regular vanilla. My younger brother's computer cost about $450. On a heavy city map, he gets this kind of FPS on different presets, and this is really good performance. Even on a weak computer, on the high preset, the shader gives at least 60 FPS. This shader has 70 million downloads, and you have probably heard about it. It is BSL. Let's find out whether it is overrated or still the king. But first, an interesting fact. The previous 3 shaders were built exactly on its base. So this is not just a shader, but a whole foundation on which half of what we saw today stands. During the day, the image looks good. The clouds are quite simple, without volume and without shadows on the ground. After photon, this is especially noticeable. The water is almost the same as in the previous 3 shaders. Now it is clear where they originally took it from. Inside buildings, everything is clearly visible, and there are nice shadows. Solas, of course, looks prettier, and BSL is just comfy. The nether here is simply bright, nothing unexpected. And in the end, there is only fog and a small beam of light above the head, which follows you when you move. FPS with this shader dropped by about 20% for me, and this is a good result. This shader is definitely not overrated, but also not the king, just good and time-tested, which by the way is almost 10 years old. We started with a shader that was downloaded by only one person, and we end here, at the mark of more than 200 million downloads. That is more than the population of some countries. Now let's figure out what its secret is. Originally, this shader started as a tweak of BSL, the same shader with 70 million downloads, and at the moment it has already surpassed it 3 times. It has 2 versions. In the reimagined version, pixel square clouds and regular water are used. In general, everything is simple in vanilla style, but it looks a little better than vanilla. And the unbound version focuses on volumetric and more realistic clouds with saturated colors. The image becomes much more realistic. At the same time, of course, they have a difference in performance. For me personally, the difference between them is about 20 frames per second, but on a weak PC, it may be a little more. With unbound, the day looks saturated and bright, and the water is transparent and minimalistic. Inside buildings, a soft glow from blocks appears. Of course, not as bright as in Solas, but still noticeable. By the way, the ore here also glows with its own color, and that is nice. In the Nether, everything is quite calm. Light fog and saturated lava, and in the end, a purple glow appears above the head. It is of course not the most impressive among all that we saw, but it has its own atmosphere, so the best shader in beauty and performance definitely goes to complementary. I hope everyone will find something they like here.